Honestly, I think we can't afford to retaliate. If you look at where we are versus our neighbors, I'm talking about ASEAN as well, all of us have had an agreement that the best way forward is to engage. US is too important a partner, both a trading and investment partner. US is the largest investor into Malaysia and into ASEAN as well, right? Of course, in terms of trading partner is second largest to China, but in terms of export, US is the largest export market. So we can't afford to retaliate, but what's important is to engage. And we've seen that there were some red lines that we discussed during our tariff negotiation, and they understood. And I mean, that's, I guess, one of the reasons why we got 19% is because we didn't agree with all the requests.
So 19% seems to give markets a lot of clarity right now, yes. Minister. But I think one of the concerns that Singapore also shares alongside Malaysia is the potential for sectoral tariffs. Now, recently, the President, Donald Trump, actually mentioned he's mulling a 300% tariff on semiconductor components or exports. I mean, how are you bracing yourselves for the sectoral part of the discussions? Because some of our guests who've come on here said this might be the more important thing for Southeast Asian nations like Malaysia to focus on.
Yes. For Malaysia, this is very important, just like Singapore, because E&E sector is a major sector for us economically, but also in terms of export. 60% of our export to US is from the E&E sector, of which half of it is semiconductor. To date, it's still 0%. Investigations are ongoing under the Section 232, right? So that, I think, means that they have yet to decide. Having said that, as you mentioned, JP, we're hearing initially 100, now 300. So engagement is continuing. It will be a concern if it does get to a number that is going to hurt the semiconductor sector. However, having said that, if you look at the supply chain of semiconductor, Malaysia, Singapore, Vietnam, I mean, all the ASEAN countries are quite involved in that supply chain into the US, into China, into Europe, and this will have an impact to not just for Malaysia or for ASEAN, but globally as well.
I bring that up also because 2 years ago you actually mentioned, or you actually unveiled, Malaysia unveiled the Industrial Master Plan 2030, where it was an attempt for Malaysia to move up seriously up the value chain with regards to semiconductors. And one of the things you also mentioned was 60,000 semiconductor engineers by 2030. Given everything that's happened now, Minister, has this moved the goalposts or perhaps hindered the Industrial Master Plan's goals, which I think are very exciting, not just for Malaysia, but for the entire region?
Yeah. Well, we continue. We just celebrated the 1-year anniversary of the National Semiconductor strategy in terms of training of engineers. For example, you mentioned 60,000, we've done 15,000, and we've got many companies now. In fact, in a perverse way, it has actually helped build more resilience in the sector because of the geoeconomics that's happening. We are seeing a lot more countries, especially Europe and other parts of the world, looking at semiconductor diplomacy, where they are looking at Malaysia, Singapore, this region, as a region where they can play, not play the game, but play the part where supply chain, when it comes to semiconductor, can relook at the expertise and relocate some of their businesses in this region.
So have investments in the semiconductor space, which really picked up over the last 2 years, has that continued unabated, or has that perhaps slowed down? Because as we know, this is going to be important for Malaysia to move away from just simple packaging to more advanced packaging and even design, for instance.
Well, the last 6 months has been challenging because, like you mentioned, there's no certainty. So when you talk to companies, there has been concerns about whether they should proceed with some of the plans. And to date, whatever that's been committed has been ongoing. It's just new ones that they are still debating and mulling over whether they should. But having said that, when during the National Semiconductor Strategy anniversary, we met with many major companies, and they are saying that in the long term, they still need to ensure that in terms of supply chain resiliency, about this is supply chain security for semiconductor, this region is seen as a key region to continue to be a part of that supply chain.
Dugu, can you just flesh out just how important semiconductors are to Malaysia, especially in terms of employment? I've seen some numbers suggesting that the semiconductor industry, the whole supply chain, including ancillary companies, etc., could involve about 100,000 jobs. Is that right?
Direct is 100,000. Indirect is more. You're right.
How much more do you think?
So you just look at automotive industry, for example. Automotive industry is 700,000, and if you look at vertical integration of supply chain or ecosystem, that could mean double of 100,000. So
200,000 jobs
easily. 100,000 is direct. So we confirm that, because the good thing during this negotiation is direct. We have to see the impact, right? And we see how many people are employed in the sector. We discuss, and the numbers came out. We check with the chambers, we check with the we can do to such more granular details, even to salary scale. And you're right, it's 100,000.